LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the May 8th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the dozen best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be really educational, informative, yet somehow fun, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. I will have some political commentary, some political comedy coming up in just a moment. But, you know, there's a writer's strike. There's no Saturday Night Live, not even any Real Time with Bill Maher, where I sometimes take my political comedy from. And so I had to take it from Fox News. And I'll get to that in a minute, but I just want to make sure that I go over the main topic that you see as the title of the video. The American mass shooting epidemic continues, and I'll be talking about that in depth after this. That was one of the main topics on the Sunday morning news analysis shows because of this recent shooting over the weekend in Allen, Texas. And like you'll see, there are more mass shootings this year than there are days so far this year. That comes up in one or two of the news summaries I'll be showing you. I'll be talking about the total number of gun deaths in the United States and per capita. I have a link down in the video description to the Pew Research Center stuff on that, and that's one of the things that was missing in the news summaries, and I'll get to all that. There's a little bit on the debt ceiling at the end, and there's even like a gun angle to the debt ceiling, as you'll see when we get to those last two clips. There's a brief coverage of immigration, Title 42, this COVID health emergency order that let the U.S. government expel a lot more people more quickly who were trying to seek asylum in the United States. Well, that's going to expire this week, and I'll talk about that briefly when it comes up in the news summaries, but actually the topic of immigration is the topic of my first political comedy clip, but this is actually like two dueling political comedy clips from Fox News. I don't know, is it unintentional comedy or are they trying to make a joke? I don't know. You can tell me this. This actually, I have this theory that this comes from the breaking news last week on my show, or on the day of my show, that Tucker Carlson was fired by Fox News. And so who are they going to get in there to replace him? So this is sort of, is this like a racism off between Jesse Waters and Kayleigh McEnany on two different shows? Trying to like see who can be like most racist so they can get the Tucker Carlson spot. Well, let's see what Jesse Waters did. This is was this last Tuesday? I think it was last Tuesday on the 5, which I have said some positive things about that show because unlike many Fox News shows, there's one person representing the left. I mean, sometimes it's Geraldo Rivera, which is kind of weak, and sometimes it's, as in this clip, Jessica Tarlov, who actually does kind of call Jesse Waters on his racism here if you listen carefully. But that's the only pushback to that first clip in my political comedy Racism Off on Fox News this last week over here.
I saw on the way into work a illegal immigration family digging through the trash looking for recyclables.
How did you know they were illegal?
You can tell. And
Jesse.
I can tell. I'm a city guy, and you don't want me to get into it, but I can tell. And it is the saddest thing to see because they're not able to work here. They came to work, but they're not able to work here. And the point is this. You have to be able to choose the people that come into the country based on needs. If you need this type of person, you need this type of, bring them in. But to just say, yeah, come everybody in, and then, oops, you know, now people are looking for, you know, a 5-cent bottle. That's not right. And you can't blame the guy down in Texas for that. Joe Biden is the common denominator for all of this. It's like a bad manager that doesn't do his job. Then everybody on the staff's pointing fingers and bitching about the other person. But if the manager would just do their job, everybody could stay in their lane. Texas could focus on Texas, and New York could focus on New York.
You're blaming Joe Biden because he was raised by Puerto Ricans.
Yeah, truck driving Puerto Rican and Jewish people.
Yes, there you go. Coming up, Hunter's Biden.
Yeah, coming up, Hunter, that was see, I just kept it playing through the coming up Hunter Biden's whatever. That's because the only pushback there was Jessica Tarlov saying, how can you tell people are illegal just by looking at them? And I'm a city guy, and he doesn't want to go into it, and she says, for your sake, because he's just going to dig himself deeper. Or I don't know. I don't know. Do you get in trouble for that on Fox News? Do you get promoted? Or I don't know. Also, in the second part of that rant from Jesse Waters, it seems like they have some bad managers at Fox News. Is that sort of the subtext of that last part? I don't know. But I'm also going to show you the second political comedy clip. This was from Friday. There was a big story in New York, and it was kind of a national story. This unhoused guy who was having some sort of mental episode on the subway was killed by this ex-Marine with a chokehold. And there's questions as to whether he should be charged with murder or charged with anything. Or, on Fox News, they consider him a hero, as you can kind of tell from this second political comedy clip where Kayleigh McEnany tries to win the racism off with Jesse Waters. You can tell me who you think wins after we watch that clip together over here.
We begin with the growing protest over the death of Jordan Neely. He was killed Monday after he boarded a New York City subway train. He reportedly started yelling and threatening passengers. A man identified as a former Marine tackled him and put him in a chokehold. Neely later was pronounced dead. Investigators have ruled it a homicide. And while there's an ongoing investigation, we're still trying to gather those facts. Some people have already made up their minds. Angry protesters, they took to the streets last night demanding justice or else.
What do we want? Justice. What do we want? Now. If we don't get it, if we don't get it, if we don't get it, burn it down. Yeah, if we don't get it, burn it down.
Justice or they'll burn it down. Well, at least they have rhythm. Meantime, progressive Congress.
So at least they have rhythm, she says. So what do you think? Who wins that political comedy clip racism off? Who's vying to be the next Tucker Carlson on Fox News? What do you think of my theory about how they may actually be competing for that spot by trying to be more racist? Does that even make sense? Well, anyway, that's the introductory political comedy clips. Mostly not on topic. But I am now going to get to the main topic. And before I do, I promised some actual numbers on gun deaths in the United States. Mass shootings aren't the way most gun deaths in the United States are suicides. And you kind of saw that in the thumbnail that I used for this video. This is from the Pew Research Center. It shows gun murders and gun suicides. This is just total numbers from 1968 going all the way through 2021, the last year for which they had numbers. And this was just published like 2 weeks ago. I put a link down in the video description under sources if you want to see this. Now, the one thing to remember about those suicide and murder numbers using guns is those are the total numbers, not per capita. And I thought it would actually look different if you looked at the per capita numbers, but actually here's the per capita numbers, the murders per 100,000, which now they like peaked back in the 70s at like 7.2 for murders and 7.7 for suicides. But we're actually getting pretty close again in the per capita number of murders. And my one big criticism of all the news summaries I'm about to show you that talk about mass shootings is mass shootings are really not what is responsible for most of those gun death numbers that you see. They're like the ones that get the most media attention, but it's like domestic violence is responsible, and suicide, of course, as I showed. Suicide has been winning the gun death war or the gun death number count in the U.S. like for all the way going back to the 60s, so for over 50 years. And that doesn't mean, some people say that, well, people want to commit suicide. If they don't have a gun, then they'll find some other way, or people want to kill, they'll find some other way. But guns make killing yourself and other people a lot easier. And those numbers, those per capita numbers and total numbers, they aren't matched in any other, advanced industrialized, any place that is like not at war or whatever, or like not in chaos, one of those like countries without a government or something, or with a very weak government. And I think it's pretty sad that the United States is continuing this gun death epidemic, and the mass shooting epidemics that has also increased. And I'll talk about that more as I go through the news summaries. The longest one, and I don't know, you can tell me, maybe it's the best one, is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. It's not just on this shooting. Well, actually, I think the best news summary on the shooting in Allen, Texas, is from CNN State of the Union, Jake Tapper. And I'll get to that. That's like clip 6, but this is clip 3. John Quinones is in Allen, Texas, talking to George Stephanopoulos. And then George Stephanopoulos also talks about this ABC poll, and then talks to Rebecca Jarvis about the debt ceiling and the general economy. So this is actually 3 different ABC reporters. I mean, it's a good news summary, but I don't think it's the best one on the shooting in Allen, Texas. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. We have a lot to get to, and we begin with that breaking news overnight out of Texas. Yet another mass shooting in America. It happened in an outlet mall in the Dallas area. 9 now dead, 7 wounded. Hundreds of shoppers were terrorized before the gunman was killed by a police officer. John Quinones is on the scene in Allen, Texas. Good morning, John.
Good morning, George. Yet another heartbreaking, tragic day, this time in Allen, Texas. Here in Allen, Texas, just north of Dallas. The victims, innocent folks who were out enjoying a beautiful spring day, doing a little shopping in the mall behind me. Investigators are now reviewing graphic video of the moment the gunman stepped out of a sedan and opened fire. Thousands of shoppers running for their lives. A police officer nearby heard the gunfire and shot the gunman dead. But by then, the gunman, had already shot 8 victims, ranging in age from 5 to 61. 7 others remain hospitalized this morning, 3 of them in critical condition, 4 are stable. You know, George, this weekend's tragedy marks the 199th mass shooting so far this year in the U.S., and we've only had 127 days, and we're barely into the month of May. George?
It is just unfathomable. Okay, John Quinones, thanks very much. We're going to go to Washington now. And our brand new poll conducted with the Washington Post, it shows major challenges for President Biden. His approval rating's at 36%, a career low. More Americans now say Donald Trump did a better job handling the economy, and Trump is leading Biden in a 2024 matchup. But as the president prepares for direct talks with Republicans over the nation's debt limit, a majority of Americans agree with his refusal to negotiate over meeting America's debt obligations. We're going to speak with Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen after this report from Chief Business and Economics Correspondent Rebecca Jarvis.
As President Biden and congressional leaders prepare to hold their first talks on the debt ceiling this week, neither side is showing signs of backing down.
The bill is passed.
House Republicans passed their bill last week to raise the debt ceiling while dramatically cutting domestic spending.
We will not pass a debt ceiling that just raises it without doing something about our debt.
While Democrats are insisting on a clean debt limit raise without conditions.
The time to discuss those cuts is not hostage taking with the debt ceiling. That is too dangerous.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has warned the U.S. could default as early as June 1st. On Friday, President Biden slammed MAGA Republicans over the standoff.
Whether you pay the debt or not doesn't have a damn thing to do with what your budget is. They're 2 separate issues.
If Congress fails to act, analysts predict dire consequences. A major stock market collapse, millions of job losses, no Social Security checks for nearly 50 million seniors, and unpaid troops. Next week's showdown comes after a surprising jobs report shows the labor market remains resilient despite turmoil in the banking system and rising interest rates. The U.S. added 253,000 jobs in April, outpacing expectations by more than 70,000, as unemployment hit a 5-decade low of 3.4%. The White House lauding the numbers.
We obviously have more work to do, but we're trending in the right direction. And I think we're making real progress.
The jobs market could complicate efforts to slow inflation, with the Fed hiking interest rates another quarter point this week, the 10th consecutive increase over the last year. The Fed chair signaling this may be the last hike.
Our future policy actions will depend on how events unfold.
Wall Street still on edge after 3 major U.S. bank failures in less than 2 months. 2 additional regional bank stocks, PacWest and Western Alliance, recovered some lost ground Friday after plunging earlier in the week. But the specter of a U.S. default could upend the entire economy if Congress does not act in time.
We need to end this drama as quickly as possible. If we don't, we're going to go into recession, and our fiscal challenges will be made even worse.
For This Week, Rebecca Jarvis, ABC News, New York.
Thanks to Rebecca for that. We're joined now by the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen. Madam Secretary.
And I will have a clip of Janet Yellen talking to George Stephanopoulos and my last 2 clips on the debt ceiling, which, like I said, also has a gun angle. So stay tuned for clips 11 and 12 if you want to see how the debt ceiling debate actually ends up with a gun angle to make it all fit into my main topic, sort of. But I mean, I actually thought the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary at the beginning had the best reporting on the upcoming debt ceiling negotiations, and the total, that Rebecca Jarvis report at the end was pretty good. I don't know why they focus so much on their poll results, although I've been hearing about those poll results, or that ABC poll, like all day on Fox News. It's, let me see if I can get here, let me change the audio source here. So yeah, like this is the Fox News, this is the ABC poll result that I saw harped on like multiple times an hour all day on Fox News. And what I found amusing is the one part of that poll that I didn't see all day on Fox News. Here, let me import that screenshot here and change it so that I can talk to you. What was that? Do you remember this one? Yeah, this one about how Biden should not negotiate with Republicans on the debt ceiling. Somehow that part of the poll never showed up on Fox News, even though they spent like all day, every hour, multiple times an hour talking about this result and how Biden's screwed and nobody wants Biden, or everyone hates Biden, or whatever. So yeah, I wanted to point that out from the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary. The next news summary is NBC News' Meet the Press. They do talk about the debt ceiling and immigration, and of course the shooting in Allen, Texas. And then they also talk about the growing scandals at the Supreme Court, which I briefly talked about last week. If you missed last week's show, I started with a great clip for political comedy of Roy Wood Jr. roasting Clarence Thomas and some other, and anti-critical race theory and NFTs and crypto. And that's a great clip from the White House Correspondents' Dinner. You can go back and watch that episode if you missed it last week, if you want to see me talk about Clarence Thomas a little bit. This is the best coverage of Clarence Thomas, although there's a big mistake at one point where they don't highlight the word hospitality. I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the NBC News Meet the Press news summary together over here.
Good Sunday morning. Before we get to politics, it's another shooting. At least 8 people are dead, including children, after a gunman opened fire at a suburban outlet mall in Allen, Texas, not far from Dallas, before the gunman was shot and killed by a police officer who happened to be there. This is the second deadliest mass shooting this calendar year. When we came on the air last week, by the way, we were following the manhunt for another Texas gunman who had fatally shot 5 people after he was asked by a neighbor to simply stop firing his gun in his yard. This week, 6 people were killed in Henrietta, Oklahoma. In Atlanta, a gunman opened fire in a waiting room at a medical office building, killing 1 and injuring 4 others. And yet, despite the uptick in mass shootings this year, there's been no change in the political response to this growing gun violence crisis. It's yet another example of our broken political situation where polarization has made governing and any action impossible. The bases of both parties punish anybody that seeks any sort of common ground. We're seeing it in the response to the judicial branch, where there is clearly a growing cancer on the Supreme Court. A body that used to pride itself on judicial independence is now perceived as just another partisan branch of government in a polarized nation. In the eyes of the American public, the justices' robes are not black anymore. They're red and blue. Last year, just 1 in 4 Americans said they had a great deal of confidence or quite a bit of confidence in the Supreme Court, according to Gallup, the lowest rating in 50 years. And that was after the leak of the draft Dobbs opinion on abortion, and before what we're dealing with right now, which is a slew of ethics issues involving the justices. What started out as a story about Justice Clarence Thomas accepting luxury vacations from a billionaire donor has become a flood of headlines questioning the court's overall ethics, and Thomas himself with a private school tuition for Thomas's great-nephew being paid for, paying for Thomas's mother's home, paying for hundreds of thousands of dollars to a nonprofit that then paid a 6-figure salary to Thomas's wife, Ginny. And there was another report this week of a conservative activist paying Ginny Thomas under the table while he had business before the court. Thomas has not responded to any of the most recent charges, and after the first story came out about the vacations, he issued a statement simply saying he didn't believe the trips with, quote, close personal friends were reportable. Now, Democrats are demanding a formal ethics code for the Supreme Court, which right now has no binding code of ethical conduct, like the one that actually governs every other federal judge in America. But most Republicans right now, afraid of angering the base or looking like you're giving the left anything, are rallying around Thomas, using whataboutism and rejecting any tightening of ethics rules.
He's obviously been targeted because he's a conservative black man, and he's on the Supreme Court in an effort to undercut the legitimacy of the court.
Many people, some in the media, many in Congress, want to make this about Justice Thomas. But you can't make this issue about Justice Thomas unless you're willing to make it about any number of other justices who had very similar situations that they're dealing with.
Now, the same broken partisan politics that are eroding the Supreme Court's reputation are making it impossible for members of Congress to move forward and make deals and legislate, whether it's on addressing mass shootings, on immigration, Title 42 is set to expire, or on the debt limit with the risk of default coming as soon as the end of this month. So as leaders from both parties prepare to meet at the White House on Tuesday, President Biden, who claims he's not negotiating right now on the debt ceiling, is clearly preparing to negotiate on the debt ceiling. But he clearly hopes that he can drive a wedge between Republicans as he does it.
There's a Republican Party and there's the MAGA Republicans. And the MAGA Republicans really have put him in a position where, in order to stay Speaker, he has to agree, he's agreed to things that maybe he believes, but are just extreme.
And joining me now is the House Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries of New York. Congressman.
And I actually don't have a clip of Hakeem Jeffries from NBC News' Meet the Press. I have a clip of Asa Hutchinson, one of the 2 Republican governor clips I'm going to show you, along with Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, talking about the gun issue specifically. Like I said, I thought that was the best news summary on the growing scandals at the Supreme Court. My one quibble with the way they covered that was this highlighting here, where they highlighted the words close personal friends as, you know, the exception that Clarence Thomas is using for the hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of vacations he got from Harlan Crow. But actually the word hospitality is what should really be highlighted there, because hospitality is the exception to disclosure. Hospitality, I mean, maybe hospitality from close personal friends, but it's the hospitality exception. You know, how close the friends are, but if like you stay at someone's house or you stay at someone's whatever, but I don't think the hospitality exception was ever supposed to include lavish vacations all around the world on like billionaire's yacht or what. But anyway, I don't know how far that Supreme Court scandal is going to go. I think I mentioned last week that I decided Clarence Thomas was dishonest before he was even accused of sexual harassment by Anita Hill. I talked about how I was like a victim of the Bush recession when Clarence Thomas was nominated, and so I was home to watch. I watched on C-SPAN his hearings before the whole Anita Hill set of hearings, just his views, and he claimed he had never come to any conclusion on Roe v. Wade, and that's when I knew he was not an honest person. And I think that is becoming more and more clear, although as I think Brett Kavanaugh is the one on the Supreme Court who I think I'm most angry about lying his way onto the court. That I've talked about that many times, but I didn't want to go off on that whole tangent. And no one's really talking about the Brett Kavanaugh scandal. That would be, I guess, another criticism I have of that Meet the Press news summary on Supreme Court scandals. There's like a new documentary coming out about how Brett Kavanaugh's accusers were never, or the accusations of sexual misconduct by him, especially in his freshman year at Yale with Debbie Ramirez, were never really investigated. And in fact, there was like a false claim that it was somebody else who harassed Debbie Ramirez, who wasn't even in the freshman class, didn't even come to Yale till a year later. That's something that just came out recently. And if we're going to talk about Supreme Court scandals, what about what Brett Kavanaugh did to Debbie Ramirez and Lawrence Hall back in the freshman year, 1983, 1984, huh? I've talked about that incessantly. And anyway, but I'm going off on the tangent even farther. The next news summary is CBS News Face the Nation. It just focuses on on the latest mass shooting in Allen, Texas. It's Margaret Brennan and their reporter on the scene, Omar, I think it's Villafranca. I'm sure Margaret Brennan will pronounce it correctly in the news summary we watch. I'll talk about a little more after we watch together over here.
Morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We have a lot to get to this morning, including that migrant surge expected at the border. But we're going to begin another Sunday with news of gun violence, shattering several communities across the country yesterday. The deadliest toll was taken in a suburb about 25 miles north of Dallas. CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca is on the scene. Omar?
Margaret, just after 3:30 yesterday afternoon, there was mayhem and carnage at this suburban mall when a gunman who was heavily armed and wearing body armor opened fire, killing 8 people and injuring 7 others before police finally shot and killed him. Investigators have not released the names of the victims or the shooter. We want to warn you, some of the video you're about to see is disturbing. Dashcam video captured the moment the gunman emerged from a gray car in the parking lot and opened fire on people shopping at the Allen Premium Outlets. Shoppers ran for cover as the gunfire continued until an Allen Police Department officer in the area on an unrelated call sprang into action.
He heard gunshots, went to the gunshots, engaged the suspect and neutralized the suspect.
Witnesses described the panic and terror as the shooter fired dozens of rounds.
It was at least 50 to 100 rounds. It was nonstop, and there was nothing we could do. It was just terrible.
And all of a sudden we heard pop, 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 and I just grabbed my kids and ran.
7 people were killed at the scene, including the gunman. 2 later died from their injuries. 3 of the victims are in critical condition. 4 are stable.
We know you are grieving. We are grieving. Rest assured, the nation and the world are also grieving.
Texas has been here before. Almost a year ago, 19 children and 2 teachers were killed in an attack at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. According to the Gun Violence Archive, this is the 199th mass shooting of 2023. Today is only the 127th day of the year.
So yeah, you saw CBS there, as well as earlier I showed ABC mentioned that there had been 199 shootings so far this year, and we're only at the 127th. Did I get that right? I whatever. I was trying to prepare this other part here. I was making sure I got the name of the person quoted in the final news summary that makes this CNN State of the Union news summary is, well, it's the second shortest. At Fox News Sunday's less than a minute because they wanted to get to Greg Abbott, but and of course they don't want to spend too much time reminding people that Republicans are stopping common sense gun control laws. Although I will sort of show Shannon Bream bring that up with Greg Abbott in the clip after next. But I have two more news summaries, CNN and Fox News Sunday. CNN State of the Union, Jake Tapper, I think gives the best, most pathos-inducing coverage of the shooting in Allen, Texas, because he has this guy, Stephen Spainhour, who I saw, this clip is just horrific of his description of being like one of the first responders on site after the shooting was over. This kind of got to me. And then I saw him, he was interviewed over on MSNBC's Sunday show with Jonathan Capehart, and he was really passionate about, as a former police officer, advocating for gun control. I'm sorry I didn't get you that clip, but Jake Tapper shows one of the more devastating descriptions that I saw him give about being the first responder on the scene in this clip. And then Jake Tapper also does a good job as, a journalist and political reporter, showing the lack of transparency from the government officials afterwards, which I will talk about a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is once again shaken. 8 people are dead and at least 7 others injured outside Dallas, Texas, the victims of a murderous rampage at an outlet mall, as a sunny Saturday afternoon family shopping trip became an all too familiar scene these days in America of carnage.
I never imagined in 100 years I would be thrust into the position of being the first responder on the site to take care of people. The first girl I walked up to was crouched down, covering her head in the bushes. So I felt for her pulse, pulled her head to the side, and she had no face.
And she had no face. That Good Samaritan also tried to help a mother who was killed while trying to protect her child with her body.
And so when I rolled the mother over, he came out, and I asked him, "Are you okay?" And he said, "My mom is hurt, my mom's hurt." So rather than traumatize him anymore, I put him around the corner, set him down. He was covered from head to toe like somebody had poured blood on him.
The Allen, Texas shooter is dead, killed, police say, by a local officer at the mall who was there on an unrelated call, who heard the shots and confronted the shooter. A photo obtained by CNN shows what appears to be the gunman dressed in black body armor with an AR-15 style rifle on the ground. A day after the shooting, local officials there have still not confirmed anything about the shooter's weapon, his name, his identity, his possible motive, how long he was shooting people before he was stopped. Officials refused to answer questions at a press conference last night. A striking lack of accountability to members of the public for whom they work. Members of the public who are shocked and grieving and fearful for their own safety. These leaders always seem to have prayers, not so much answers. Joining us now is a Texas lawmaker who knows gun tragedies all too well. He's the state senator who represents Uvalde, Texas, Roland Gutierrez. Senator
And Texas Senator Gutierrez, Texas State Senator Gutierrez there had a good interview with Jake Tapper. I'm not going to show that clip down in the video description. I forgot to say this at the beginning. Under sources, you can click on the links to all the big 5 corporate outlets and find the sources of all my clips, and including State of the Union if you want to see Jake Tapper's interview with Senator Roland Gutierrez there. That other set of clips from Stephen Spainhour, that was really, really disturbing. She had no face, and Jake Tapper even repeated the line that was so devastating from that description. And he was the one journalist there who talked about the lack of transparency from the government officials. You know, since then it's come out that the shooter was wearing this RWDS patch that stands for Right Wing Death Squad, and he was like a avid follower of white supremacist websites, and that's a fact I didn't hear a lot on Fox News today, and the Fox News Sunday news summary is even shorter, not really with all the devastating details you just heard on CNN. Probably the worst of the news summaries, but, you know, it's Fox News. What do you expect? I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that final news summary together over here.
From Fox News in Washington, we begin with that breaking news out of Texas. At least 8 people killed after authorities say a gunman opened fire at an outlet mall. It happened yesterday afternoon in Allen, Texas, north of Dallas. At least 7 additional people were injured, including a 5-year-old. Police say an officer just happened to be nearby, heard the shots, engaged and killed the suspect. Hundreds of shoppers were in the area as it all unfolded. President Biden has been briefed. White House says it is offering support. It all comes just over a week since a different gunman killed 5 people execution style at a home in Cleveland, Texas. And it comes as Texas has been preparing for the expected end of Title 42 restrictions at the border this week. Joining us now, Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott.
And you can kind of tell that Fox News really wanted to talk about the immigration issue because they love to talk about that issue. And I'm not really going to talk more about that issue, though. Immigration is actually a good thing in general for the United States. It solves a couple big problems. You know, there are a lot of job openings without any people to take those jobs. That's why you saw in Rebecca Jarvis's report back in the ABC News summary how unemployment is at like a 50-plus year low. So immigration helps with the lack of available workers, and also Medicare and Social Security. One of our problems in the United States is we have like more and more retired people being supported by fewer and fewer workers. Well, other than like having more babies and increasing the number of the younger people in our population that way, the other way you solve that problem is bring in more workers, more like unretired workers to support our retired workers. And anyway, you never hear that on Fox News either. And I'm only going to show you the gun-related questions that Shannon Bream asked Texas Governor Greg Abbott. And, you know, she starts off with a softball question, you know, like, what do you think? What do you think about this latest mass shooting? So that's not a really good cross-examination of this government official from Fox News. But her second question actually is really good. And this is something they've shown on Fox News a few times. It's almost surprising. Their poll showed that all these common sense gun control measures are wildly popular with the American people. Like several things are over 80%, and having more people carry guns, that's at like 45%. You'll see the poll in the follow-up question. My big criticism of Shannon Bream is, even though she asked that question, kudos to her for that, the follow-up, there's no follow-up. She lets Greg Abbott get away with concentrating on, mental health. And of course, it turns out to be white supremacy. You think that's why? You think that's why the government officials in Texas didn't want to talk or answer any questions, because they already knew about the right-wing death squads? I don't know. But anyway, here is Shannon Bream sort of cross-examining the governor of Texas, but not very well. And then after that, I'll show Chuck Todd not cross-examining another Republican very well, Asa Hutchinson, former Arkansas governor. But first, here's Shannon Bream and Greg Abbott with a fairly softball interview, except for the one poll question over here.
We'll get to the border in just a minute, but we want to start with that tragic shooting.
Well, Shannon, obviously this is just devastating. Texans are hurting today. And
the people who are hurting the most, obviously, are the families of the victims, families who've lost a loved one, families who have a loved one who is injured. And our main priority right now is to help and support those families and the Allen community. And I'll be going up to Allen later today to begin the process of providing hope and healing. But I got to tell you that there are questions that are lingering that the families want answers to. And that is, why did this happen? Why did the government do this? How did this happen? And I know that those families need an answer as quickly as possible. And then the last thing I'll tell you, and I just want to reiterate my gratitude and the gratitude of all Texans for the swift response of that police officer. You had just a single police officer who had to confront that dangerous gunman and did the right thing by taking swift action to eliminate the gunman. And we are grateful for that officer's heroism.
Absolutely, truly a hero, the very definition. As happens with these shootings, it almost immediately turns to the political conversation about gun reforms. One state senator pointing the finger at you and the GOP there in Texas, saying there are loose and dangerous gun laws. I want to put up a poll that we just had on possible gun reforms here in the U.S. This is just out from Fox News. When you ask people what they would favor, background checks for guns, enforcing existing gun laws, legal age to 21, requiring mental health checks, flagging people for danger to self, all of those score at more than 80%. Are there things that you would consider in Texas or that you think Congress should consider at a federal level along those lines?
Well, on the federal level, as you know, some laws were passed last year to begin to address this. At the state level, listen, this is something that we've been grappling with over the past year. And there are some potential easy solutions, such as passing laws that we're working on right now to get guns out of the hands of dangerous criminals and to increase penalties for criminals who possess guns. But Shannon, we need to recognize a reality. What we've seen across the United States over the past year or two, and that is an increased number of shootings in both red states and blue states. Shannon, we've seen an increased number of shootings in states with easy gun laws as well as states with very strict gun laws. I think that the state in which the largest number of victims have occurred this year is in California, where they have very tough gun laws where 11 people died. And so one thing that we can observe very easily, and that is there has been a dramatic increase in the amount of anger and violence that's taking place in America. And what Texas is doing in a big-time way, we are working to address that anger and violence by going to its root cause, which is addressing the mental health problems behind it. We know that Texas had been lagging in addressing mental health for years, and that's why over the past 3 sessions, we've added almost $25 billion to address mental health. We're in the waning days of a session right now where we will be adding even more funding, about $3 billion, to address mental health needs in the state of Texas, especially in rural Texas, and especially for children in schools. People want a quick solution. The long-term solution here is to address the mental health issue. And one last thing about this, Shannon, and that is it truly seems today that America is more divided than we've been in decades. And we got to find a way in this country where we can once again reunite Americans as Americans and come together as one big family. And in that regard, find ways to reduce violence in our country.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly divisions over any number of heated topics, including this one. I want to get to the border because Title 42 lifts this week.
And she's really in a hurry to get to the border, especially accepting that last part of what Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, said, that we're really divided on things. And yeah, we are divided. And she says, yeah, we really are divided, especially on this issue. Did she forget that this is the poll that she showed? America is not divided on background checks, enforce existing gun laws, legal age 21 to buy all guns, require mental health checks, flag people danger to self, require 30-day waiting period, ban assault weapons is even at 61%. That's not even that divided, but everything above that is almost 80 to 90% there. So I mean, kudos to Fox News for ever showing these poll results to anyone. And I've seen it a few times on Fox News, so kudos to Shannon Bream for bringing it up. But then, of course, in Greg Abbott's answer, she let him get away with just talking about mental health, which, it's like the only thing Republicans can talk about that's popular on this list. Certainly not more citizens carrying guns down there at the bottom. So at least he didn't say that, at least. But anyway, that was not a very good cross-examination by Shannon Bream, despite having that one good question there. And similarly here, you'll see Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press talking to former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, who's now running to be the Republican nominee for president against Donald Trump. Probably doesn't have a chance. And here he is talking about what he thinks about gun laws. And I mean, Chuck Todd has kind of a tricky question that maybe one of his producers came up with. I mean, he often has good questions, but then he doesn't follow up at all because, I don't know, maybe they only have limited time and they want to get through a lot more questions. And you'll see like Chuck Todd has like 2 different question areas he wants to talk to. First he talks about guns and then he goes to the Supreme Court, but he doesn't follow up on the gun question. The gun question is, how can you deal? It's a tricky question because it assumes Republicans are going to talk about mental health because that's like the most popular thing on this list that Republicans are, are going to talk about. And so Chuck Todd has the tricky thing. Well, how are you going to deal with mental health without regulating the guns at all? So that's kind of a good question, but then Asa Hutchinson never really answers the part about regulating the guns or not regulating the guns, and Chuck Todd doesn't follow up in this clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
A couple of tricky policy issues that are very divisive, or else we'd have resolved them by now. We had a lot more mass shootings again this week. What we saw in Texas at an outlet mall. Let me ask you this. Do all of these recent shootings took place in states that have expanded the rights of gun owners? If we want to tackle the mental health issue, how do you do it without regulating the firearm?
Well, I mean, first of all, we've had mass shootings that occurred in blue states and states that have significant restrictions on firearms. And so they happen across America. And Chuck, this is a serious issue for us. It breaks everyone's heart and causes everybody to think, what can we do to prevent this or to reduce the deaths by violence? And so, as you said, the mental health is a significant part of it that we need to invest in. And you talked earlier about there's, not any bipartisan consensus. And we did find last year a bipartisan consensus to address some issues after the Uvalde shooting in Texas. And I applaud Senator Cornyn for his leadership on that. So we just have to continue to look at what makes a difference, what fits within our constitutional framework. Yeah. And right now there is the consensus on addressing the mental health crisis we have in America, particularly as it came out of the pandemic.
Let me ask you this about the current crisis of confidence at the Supreme Court.
And yeah, like I said, Chuck Todd has no follow-up there, just goes to a second question on the Supreme Court, even though Asa Hutchinson never really answered his question about, not regulating the guns. So let him get away with just his talking points, which that's not what journalists should do. And then the final clip I have on the main topic of mass shootings and gun control is Senator Dick Durbin, the number 2 Democrat in the Democratic Senate, asked by George Stephanopoulos, asked by Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union about whether there are more gun control laws that can be passed federally by the Congress. And Dick Durbin's answer is actually really important. And if Americans really want to see a change in the gun laws. The number one thing they need to do is have Republicans who give answers like you heard from Greg Abbott or Asa Hutchinson pay a political price. There have to be Republican anti-gun control politicians who lose because people are voting them out based on wanting better gun laws. And until that happens, at least the federal laws aren't going to change. But if that incentive starts existing for politicians, if it starts affecting their political careers, that's when you're going to see a change. And anyway, this is what Dick Durbin said to George Stephanopoulos. Why did I say George Stephanopoulos twice? To Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union yesterday, that I'll talk about a little more after we watch it together.
Senator, we have so much to talk about. Obviously, let's start with the horrific news out of Texas. 8 people killed after a gunman opened fire at a shopping center. Congress passed the first significant gun legislation in decades after the Uvalde shooting. It still obviously fell far short of what you think is needed. Do you think there is any appetite for any more potential bipartisan efforts to build on the law, perhaps to expand the red flag laws to keep guns out of the hands of people who are a danger to themselves or others? Or is the message to Americans who are tired of living like this simply that that's it, there's nothing more Congress is going to do?
There is something more that America can do, and it's called an election. And if people across America are fed up with these mass shootings and killings and the terrible things that are happening even to our children as a result of it, they're going to vote accordingly. We need to have that kind of a revolution in thinking across America that this is unacceptable. This was not dictated by the Constitution. It's a point of view and a position, a political position, which makes no sense when it comes to the safety of America.
Let's turn to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is an area you've been focused on a lot in the last few weeks, as you know.
And that is an important issue that I wanted to show there, that Jake Tapper covered the Supreme Court, even though it wasn't in his news summary like it was in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary. That was the last clip that was really on the issue of guns that I'm going to show you, although the word gun is going to come up in this next clip. In fact, the phrase "a gun to America's head" is going to come up in this next clip, even though it's about the debt ceiling. And George Stephanopoulos, even though this is live on the weekend that they're covering this mass shooting as one of the top stories, it doesn't even register with him that that was not good word choice from the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, though she does give some interesting information about one way that this whole debt ceiling issue could be resolved by making the linkage between spending cuts and raising the debt ceiling, making it ambiguous. That's a good question George Stephanopoulos asked. Could you do the two things, but let Republicans say they're linked, but let Democrats say they're not linked? That's one of these weird political tricks of ambiguity that sometimes get things done. But there's also the gun part that George Stephanopoulos didn't pick up on that I'll talk about a little more after we watch that penultimate newsmaker clip together today over here.
About it, of course, you talked about spending cuts. We've now seen 43 Republican senators say they're not going to extend the debt limit without significant spending cuts and other reforms. Of course, the House passed their bill as well, but the president says he's not going to negotiate. So is one possibility that you do a side negotiation on spending cuts? The president says it's not tied to the debt limit. Republicans say it is?
Well, look, I don't want to get ahead of the negotiations that will occur. President Biden has invited the leadership of Congress to the White House on Tuesday. I know he wants to set up a process in which spending priorities and levels are discussed and negotiated. But these negotiations should not take place with a gun really to the head of the American people, because...
But they are taking place with that gun to the head of the American people.
Well, it's important for Congress to meet a responsibility. since 1960, the debt ceiling has been raised 78 times, 3 times during the prior administration, always with bipartisan support. And it simply is unacceptable for Congress to threaten economic calamity for American households and the global financial system as the cost of raising the debt ceiling and getting agreement on budget priorities. But of course, a negotiation about spending levels and priorities should take place, and the president is more than prepared to engage in that negotiation.
Of course, there's always the chance. Of course, there's always the chance with this kind of negotiation, this kind of brinksmanship, that you don't reach a deal, and then it comes back to the president. He said on Friday night that he's not ready to invoke the 14th Amendment. Of course, the 14th Amendment says that full.
Yeah, there is some argument that the law that puts a limit on the debt ceiling is unconstitutional. Because if you look at the 14th Amendment, I happen to have my Constitution right here. Amendment 14 says something about, wait, it's on the next, oh yeah. The validity of the, this is section 4, the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payments of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned, but neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of or any claim for the loss or emancipation of any slave, but such debt. So it's like the full faith and credit part of this, whatever. I didn't, yeah, which abridged. So there's this whole thing about the debt cannot be questioned in the 14th Amendment, and whether the debt ceiling is even constitutional. And so that is a good question if you want to see that whole questioning and answering. The Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says that the Biden administration isn't ready to take unilateral action to claim that they can continue issuing Treasury bonds, which is how they incur debt because of the 14th Amendment. But they haven't taken that off the table either. There's that whole thing about ambiguity, but there was also that gun to the head of the American people, which was like an odd phrase to use on a day when all the news programs were covering this mass shooting, which Margaret Brennan kind of agreed with the Republican when he brought that up. She asked him about what Janet Yellen said in that last clip. There was very little questioning of the guests on Face the Nation about guns and gun control. This guy, Patrick McHenry, he wasn't asked about that at all by Margaret Brennan. He brought up guns. She didn't bring up guns. But you can hear his answer, and there's also a possible solution in his answer that I will talk about after we watch this final newsmaker clip together over here.
The Treasury Secretary said today it's you all who are putting a gun to the head of the American economy. That is what she said. And she's talking about the fact that
Hell of a statement on a day like today, which shows that it's all about politics for this administration.
U.S.
not
Treasuries
about
are the
economic
bedrock of the financial system. You know that very well. So don't you need to just say default's off the table?
And that's what we did by passing a plan. The president did not think we could pass a plan out of the House. So therefore, he said it's a clean debt ceiling or nothing. And so a clean debt ceiling is now off the table, with Republicans in the House and Senate saying, time to negotiate between the Speaker and the President. That's all we're saying. The Speaker's not laid down a red line. That's been done in previous iterations of the debt ceiling by Democrats and Republicans in the legislative branch. He didn't do that. There are no red lines other than the fact that we must address our fiscal house at a time where federal spending is up 40% from pre-COVID levels. I think it's a reasonable thing for us to do. And in fact, that's what the American people say. 3 out of 4 Americans say the president should negotiate with the speaker to address our fiscal house.
I want to get to banking, too, but just very quickly, is the short-term patch off the table, short-term lift to the debt ceiling?
I think everything's on the table at this point. The key thing that has to be in this equation is addressing our fiscal house, short-term and long-term.
So in addition to the ambiguity that Janet Yellen said she might accept, where Republicans say that the raising the debt ceiling is tied to spending cuts, but Democrats say that they're separate. The linkage ambiguity might be a solution. And then you just heard a short-term raising of the debt ceiling might be a solution, especially because it would get us into the budget season where the Republicans could actually introduce a budget. You know, they haven't introduced a budget. Biden actually, I think back in March, if I'm remembering correctly, he submitted his budget, and Republicans have talked about some of these draconian cuts, but they haven't said exactly what they're going to cut. You know, Democrats have said it's going to be the VA, it's going to be, you know, this and that, but because they haven't submitted a full budget, nobody really knows what it is that they're going to cut. So maybe a short-term extension of the debt ceiling, or you know, getting through like September, like Margaret Brennan was saying, that might allow the budget negotiations to resolve the issues. I don't know. That's something that I will continue covering in my Monday media mix-ups. They say the first week, Janet Yellen, in another part of that interview with George Stephanopoulos, said that the first week in June might be when the U.S. runs out of cash, although then there are a whole bunch of payments that come in the middle of June, so the government gets more cash. So maybe that's too much, that's like too soon trying to get some negotiations going. But there are negotiations happening this week, so we'll see how that turns out. I do want to thank the one super chat contributor that I had for the program here, Vandal V. Purdy. Thank you for that super chat contribution here. I'm not sure which emoji face that is with the swirly eyes, but thank you for that contribution. Also, right below the video, in the video description, I put links to become a financial supporter of the program. I saw this video has been demonetized already. Probably won't make it to monetization because I have mass shooting in the title of the video, and there's also some disturbing video included. So if you want me to get remuneration, if you want me to make money for the 8 to 10 hours that I put into making these videos every Monday, you can support the Liberal Viewer videos financially at those 2 links below the video. One is to my regular patrons on Patreon. That's my most dependable supporters. At the $5 level, you will not only get this hashtag Liberal Viewer weatherproof vinyl sticker you see behind me all the time, but you'll get one of these U.S. Constitutions. You can read the 14th Amendment yourself, and I give that to monthly $5 patrons on Patreon or to one-time PayPal contributors. Those are the 2 links under the video, and you have to give me a shipping address in the United States if you want to get those supporter rewards. I also appreciate all of you who watch every week. I saw some supportive comments live along the way that made me feel good about the work I'm putting in, and I appreciate supportive comments from the recorded show viewers, and even arguments about anything I've said that I have time to respond to during the week. hopefully I will. We'll see. And anyway, until next Monday when I will be uploading or live streaming another Monday Media Mix-Up, I'm not going to have time to do anything else on YouTube this week, I'm pretty sure. But until I do come back next Monday, I guess I will be seeing all of you around